When you look at prices in almost any modern market, from supermarkets to online stores to digital subscriptions, there is a pattern so consistent that it almost stops feeling intentional. Numbers like $9.99, $19.99, $49.99 appear repeatedly, even when the difference between those values and a rounded number like 10 or 50 is mathematically negligible. At first glance, it seems like a simple marketing habit, something decorative or even outdated. But underneath this small detail lies a structured psychological mechanism that has been refined over decades of observing how human perception interacts with numbers, value, and decision-making.
Before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how a product costs $9.99 instead of $10 and somehow it feels cheaper, even though the difference is just 1 cent? I'm Gabby. And in this video, I'm going to explain the fascinating psychology behind 99 pricing, why businesses use it everywhere, and how a tiny change in numbers can influence the way we perceive value and make buying decisions. If you enjoy content about money, psychology, and the hidden systems that shape our everyday choices, make sure you like this video and hit the subscribe button. To understand why this pricing pattern exists, it helps to start with something simple about how the brain reads numbers. Humans do not process numerical value in a perfectly linear way. Instead, we tend to anchor our perception on the first digit we see. A price of $9.99 is not processed as almost 10, but rather as something that belongs in the 9 category. That small shift in categorization changes how the entire value is interpreted, even when the difference is just 1 cent. This is not a trick of awareness, but a cognitive shortcut that the brain uses to simplify constant decision-making. When a person walks into a store or scrolls through a digital marketplace, they are not calculating each price precisely. They are scanning, comparing, and filtering. In that environment, the leftmost digit acts as a mental anchor. A product priced at $9.99 is subconsciously grouped with items in the 9 range, while something at $10 is instantly placed in a higher bracket. That single-digit shift creates a perception gap larger than the actual difference in value. The pricing strategy takes advantage of this perceptual boundary, but perception alone does not fully explain why this system became so universal. There was also a historical and mathematical layer. Retail pricing systems were once heavily dependent on manual calculation and physical cash handling. In those environments, pricing just below a round number served both psychological and operational purposes. It allowed sellers to appear slightly cheaper while still maintaining pricing discipline. Over time, as retail systems evolved, this pattern remained, not because it was necessary, but because it continued to perform effectively across different contexts. As markets became more competitive, especially in environments where multiple sellers offered nearly identical products, small differences in perceived price began to matter more than actual differences in cost. When 2 items are functionally similar, the brain defaults to the simplest comparison. Which one appears cheaper at first glance? A price of $9.99 consistently wins against $10.99 in this mental comparison, even though rationally the difference is negligible. The result is that sellers who adopt this pricing style often gain a subtle advantage in conversion rates. What makes this even more interesting is that the effect does not rely on deception in the traditional sense. Nothing about $9.99 is hidden. The information is fully visible, yet the interpretation of that information is shaped by cognitive structure rather than arithmetic logic. This is where behavioral economics becomes important. It studies the gap between what is mathematically true and what is psychologically experienced. In this case, the mathematical difference is 1 cent, but the psychological difference is the feeling of affordability.
At a deeper level, this pricing method also interacts with emotional thresholds. People tend to set internal limits for spending, often without realizing it. These thresholds are not fixed, but adaptive. For example, someone might feel comfortable spending under 10 units of currency without much hesitation, but crossing into the 10 to 20 range introduces more deliberate consideration. Pricing at $9.99 allows a product to remain just under that mental boundary, reducing friction in the decision process. The transaction feels lighter, faster, and less cognitively demanding. As this pattern repeats across thousands of purchasing decisions, it begins to shape broader economic behavior. Entire product categories are structured around these thresholds. Entry-level goods are often positioned just below key psychological boundaries. Premium versions are placed just above them to signal a shift in quality or status. The difference in pricing is not only about cost or production value, but about positioning within a mental map of perceived affordability.
There is also a subtle interaction between pricing endings and trust. Rounded numbers, like $10 or $50, are often perceived as more straightforward, sometimes even more premium or transparent, while .99 endings are associated with discounts or mass market positioning. This duality creates a layered pricing language where numbers communicate not just cost, but category, intention, and audience. The same product can feel different depending on whether it is framed as $10 or $9.99, even when nothing else changes. Interestingly, the effectiveness of this system is not uniform across all contexts or all individuals. Over time, some consumers become more aware of pricing strategies and begin to mentally adjust for them. Yet even among those who understand the mechanism intellectually, the subconscious processing often remains intact. This creates a split between analytical understanding and instinctive reaction. Knowing that $9.99 is effectively $10 does not always remove the perceptual advantage it holds in real-time decision-making. From a systems perspective, this pricing convention reflects a larger principle in economic design. Small psychological edges, when multiplied across millions of transactions, become structurally significant. A difference of 1 cent per transaction might seem irrelevant in isolation, but across large-scale retail systems, the cumulative effect can influence revenue patterns, purchasing behavior, and competitive positioning. This is not about single decisions, but about aggregated human behavior over time. As digital commerce expands, the same principle continues to evolve rather than disappear. Even in environments where pricing can be adjusted dynamically by algorithms, the .99 pattern still appears frequently. This suggests that its effectiveness is not tied to a specific era of commerce, but to a consistent feature of human cognition. The interface may change, but the underlying psychology remains stable.
When you step back and look at it more broadly, the persistence of .99 pricing reveals something important about how economic systems are designed around human perception rather than pure rationality. Markets do not operate on numbers alone. They operate on interpretation. And interpretation is shaped by cognitive shortcuts, emotional thresholds, and learned patterns that accumulate over time. So what appears to be a small cosmetic choice in pricing is actually part of a larger structure that connects psychology, mathematics, and market behavior. It is a reminder that in many cases, economic systems are not just built to reflect value, but to influence how value is felt at the moment of decision.